A ruthless billionaire thought he could crush a defenseless widow and steal her family farm. He cut her fences, poisoned her crops, and brought bulldozers right to her front porch. He thought she was completely alone. He was dead wrong. Because her son was coming home, and he was bringing the United States military with him. The blistering Georgia sun beat down on the cracked earth of the Higgins family farm, a 200-acre expanse of soybean and cornfields nestled on the outskirts of Bainbridge. For 4 generations, the Higgins family had worked this land. To the rest of the world, it was just dirt and crops. But to 64-year-old Martha Higgins, it was a living, breathing monument to her late husband, Arthur. When Arthur passed away from a sudden heart attack 3 years ago, he died with his boots on, right out by the old red barn. His final words to Martha had been a whispered plea. "Keep the farm, Martha. Don't let them take our home." Martha had kept that promise. She woke up at 4 in the morning every single day, her hands calloused and her back aching, managing the harvest, negotiating with seed vendors, and keeping the rusted tractors running. It was a hard, lonely life, but it was peaceful. That peace shattered on a humid Tuesday morning in late July, courtesy of a fleet of black Cadillac Escalades kicking up a massive cloud of dust down her gravel driveway. Out stepped Rick Caldwell. Caldwell was the CEO of Apex Logistics and Development, a multi-billion-dollar real estate firm based out of Atlanta. He was a man who wore custom Italian suits to construction sites, renowned for a predatory ruthlessness that had allowed him to pave over half the state. Caldwell was building a massive, state-of-the-art inland shipping port and warehouse complex, a project worth hundreds of millions. He had quietly bought up every neighboring property, bullying local farmers into early retirements. There was only one missing piece to his puzzle: the Higgins farm. Martha's property sat squarely in the center of what was supposed to be Caldwell's primary access highway and loading terminal. "Mrs. Higgins," Caldwell said, flashing a veneer of a smile as he stepped onto her porch, uninvited. He handed her a glossy folder. "I'm prepared to offer you a very generous sum for this. Charming little plot of land. More money than this failing farm will make in 3 lifetimes. Sign the papers and you can retire somewhere comfortable." Martha didn't even open the folder. She handed it back. "Mr. Caldwell, my husband's blood and sweat are in this soil. My son grew up running through those cornfields. This land is not for sale. Not for any price." Caldwell's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. The polite facade evaporated instantly. "You don't seem to understand how this works, Martha. I am building a $300 million facility. I do not let stubborn old women stand in the way of progress. You will sell. It's just a matter of how painful you want the process to be." With a flick of his wrist, Caldwell signaled his men, and the SUVs rolled away, leaving a lingering cloud of dust and a heavy, suffocating sense of dread. The harassment began precisely 48 hours later. First, it was the accidents. Martha woke up one morning to find the main irrigation lines powering her soybean fields completely smashed to pieces, the heavy PVC pipes violently shattered by sledgehammers. A week later, she found her perimeter fencing cut in a dozen places, allowing a neighboring herd of cattle to wander in and trample an acre of her primary cash crop. Martha immediately drove her beat-up Ford pickup into town to see Sheriff Dale Robertson. She had known Dale since high school. He used to buy sweet corn from Arthur. But when she sat in his office and explained the vandalism, pointing a direct finger at Caldwell's operation, the sheriff wouldn't meet her eyes. "Now, Martha," Sheriff Robertson drawled, nervously shuffling papers on his desk. "We don't have any proof it was Mr. Caldwell's boys. Teenagers do dumb things. We can't go throwing wild accusations at the biggest investor this county has seen in 50 years. He's a very powerful man, Martha. He just donated a fleet of new cruisers to the department." Martha stared at the man, realizing with a sickening drop in her stomach that Caldwell had already bought the local law enforcement. She was completely isolated. The sabotage rapidly escalated from vandalism to direct intimidation. Strange trucks idled at the end of her driveway at 2 in the morning, their high beams blindingly illuminating her bedroom windows. Her beloved golden retriever, Buster, mysteriously fell severely ill and had to be rushed to the vet after eating tainted meat thrown over the fence. And then came the fire. A mysterious blaze broke out in her equipment shed, destroying tens of thousands of dollars worth of fertilizer and her secondary combine harvester. The local fire chief, another man in Caldwell's deep pockets, officially ruled it an electrical fault, despite Martha pointing out the distinct, pungent smell of gasoline lingering in the charred wood. Martha's finances were bleeding out. She was spending her meager savings repairing the constant damage, trying desperately to keep the farm operational. She was exhausted, terrified, and pushed to the absolute brink of her physical and mental limits. She sat at her kitchen table late one night, the smell of smoke still clinging to her clothes, crying softly into her hands. Caldwell was winning. He was choking the life out of her farm, and there was absolutely nothing a 64-year-old widow could do to stop a billionaire. By late August, Rick Caldwell decided he was done playing in the shadows. It was time to deliver the killing blow. He needed ground broken on the access highway by September 1st, and Martha's stubborn resilience was costing him millions in delays. On a sweltering Thursday afternoon, a sleek silver Mercedes pulled into the Higgins farm, flanked by two massive, yellow Caterpillar bulldozers. The heavy machinery crawled off their flatbed transports and parked aggressively right on the property line, their massive steel blades hovering just inches from Martha's fencing. Out of the Mercedes stepped Thomas Finch, Caldwell's lead corporate attorney, a man notorious for finding loopholes so tight they could choke a python. He was accompanied by a smirking county code enforcer and a reluctant-looking Sheriff Robertson. Martha stepped out onto her porch, gripping the wooden railing to keep her hands from trembling. "Mrs. Higgins," Finch announced, his voice carrying over the idle rumble of the bulldozers. He didn't bother walking up to the porch. He spoke to her like a judge, handing down a sentence. "We are here serving official notice. A recent county environmental survey has found that your farm's fertilizer runoff is severely contaminating the local watershed. Furthermore, your property is in direct violation of 14 different newly enacted county zoning ordinances regarding agricultural storage." Martha was stunned. "That's a lie. Arthur and I won state awards for our eco-friendly farming practices. And those zoning laws were updated by the county board last week," Finch interrupted smoothly. "As of today, you are accruing fines of $10,000 every 24 hours. You also have a lien placed on this property by the county for the environmental cleanup. You are bankrupt, Mrs. Higgins. You just don't know it yet." Finch pulled a document from his leather briefcase. It was a quitclaim deed. "Mr. Caldwell is a merciful man," Finch sneered. "He is willing to assume your massive new debts and pay off the county fines. In exchange, he will give you exactly $10,000 to pack your bags and leave. You have until tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. to sign this document. If you do not, the county will seize the property. Sheriff Robertson will forcibly evict you for trespassing, and these bulldozers will flatten that farmhouse before noon. The choice is yours." Finch dropped the paperwork in her dirt driveway, turned on his heel, and got back into the Mercedes. The county official and the sheriff followed. The bulldozers, however, stayed exactly where they were, their operators smoking cigarettes and glaring at the house, a massive mechanical threat looming over her home. Martha fell to her knees in the dust, clutching the legal papers. She was trapped. Caldwell had weaponized the local government against her. No lawyer within 100 miles would take a case against Caldwell, and even if they did, she didn't have a dime left to pay them. The man had rigged the game completely. That night, a violent thunderstorm rolled through Bainbridge, mirroring the absolute turmoil in Martha's heart. She walked through the dark, empty house, touching the faded wallpaper, looking at the framed photographs of her husband, and weeping bitterly. She had failed. She was going to lose Arthur's legacy to a greedy, corrupt tyrant. But as she looked at the mantel above the fireplace, her eyes landed on a different photograph. It was her son, David, Captain David Higgins, United States Army. David had been deployed overseas for the last 14 months on a highly classified mission. He was an engineering officer, attached to a heavily armored mechanized unit. Martha had intentionally kept the farm's struggles a secret from him in her weekly emails. She knew the immense pressure he was under in a combat zone. The last thing she wanted was to distract him with her problems back home. She wanted him focused on staying alive. But looking at his proud, stoic face in his dress uniform, something inside Martha snapped. She wasn't just fighting for her and Arthur anymore. She was fighting for David's inheritance, his home. With trembling fingers, Martha picked up the heavy receiver of her landline. She couldn't call David directly due to his deployment status, but as a military mother, she had an emergency Red Cross contact number for extreme family crises. She dialed the number. A stern, professional operator answered on the second ring. "Red Cross Military Emergency Communications. How can I direct your call?" My name is Martha Higgins, she choked out, tears streaming down her face. I need to get an emergency message to my son, Captain David Higgins, 3rd Infantry Division. It's an absolute emergency. We are losing the farm. I am being forced out of my home tomorrow morning, and I am in physical danger. Please, tell him. Tell him. I'm sorry, but I need him. The operator took down the details, her tone shifting from professional to deeply empathetic. I am pushing this through, with priority alpha, Mrs. Higgins. It will bypass standard channels and go directly to his command staff. Stay safe. Martha hung up the phone. She sat in the dark living room, watching the lightning flash outside, illuminating the yellow steel of the bulldozers waiting on her property line. She didn't know if the message would reach him in time. She didn't know if he could even do anything from halfway across the world. She spent the rest of the night packing a single suitcase, preparing for the worst, waiting for the morning sun, and the arrival of Rick Caldwell's wrecking crew. She had no idea that thousands of miles away, a hardened army captain was bursting through the doors of his commanding officer's tent, a piece of paper crushed in his fist, and a look of absolute, unyielding fury in his eyes. Friday morning broke with a suffocating muggy heat that settled over Bainbridge like a wet wool blanket. At exactly 7:45 a.m., the silence of the Higgins farm was violently torn apart by the roar of heavy diesel engines. Martha stood on her front porch, her knuckles white as she gripped the wooden railing. The single-packed suitcase sat by the front door. Down the gravel driveway came the procession of her ruin. Rick Caldwell's silver Mercedes led the pack, followed closely by 2 black SUVs. Behind them, roaring to life with plumes of thick black exhaust, were the 2 massive Caterpillar bulldozers that had been parked on the property line all night. They crawled forward, their steel tracks chewing up the dirt, stopping just 50 yards from the farmhouse. Caldwell stepped out of the Mercedes, flanked by his lawyer, Thomas Finch. Today, Caldwell wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a crisp polo shirt and expensive sunglasses, dressing casually for what he viewed as a routine demolition. Trailing reluctantly behind them was Sheriff Dale Robertson, looking pale and deeply uncomfortable. "Good morning, Martha," Caldwell called out, his voice dripping with forced cheerfulness. He checked his gold Rolex. "It is 7:55 a.m. I see you've got your bag packed." A wise decision. "Have you signed the quitclaim deed?" "I haven't signed a damn thing, Rick," Martha said, her voice shaking but her chin held high. "This is stolen property, and you know it." Finch, the lawyer, sighed theatrically. "Mrs. Higgins, we have been over this. The county has placed a lien on this property. You are in default. A. If you do not hand over the signed deed right now, you leave with absolutely nothing, and the demolition begins." Caldwell snapped his fingers, and the bulldozers revved their engines, the massive steel blades lifting into the air with a terrifying hydraulic whine. The ground vibrated under Martha's feet. "Sheriff," Caldwell said, not taking his eyes off Martha, "do your job. Remove the trespasser from my construction site." Sheriff Robertson swallowed hard, resting a hand on his utility belt as he slowly walked up the porch steps. "Martha, please. Don't make me put handcuffs on you. Just come with me. There's nothing you can do anymore. He's got the county judges in his pocket. It's over." Martha closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her weathered cheek. She had fought so hard. She had tried to hold on to Arthur's legacy, but the machine was too big, too ruthless. She reached down to grab her suitcase handle. Then, the ground began to shake. It wasn't the localized vibration of the bulldozers. This was a deep, rhythmic, seismic rumbling that seemed to echo through the very bedrock of the Georgia soil. Caldwell frowned, looking over his shoulder toward the county highway. The bulldozer operators cut their engines to an idle, leaning out of their cabs to look down the road. The rumbling grew louder, accompanied by the high-pitched whine of heavy-duty turbodiesels and the unmistakable rhythmic crunch of dozens of massive tires on gravel. "What the hell is that?" Finch muttered, shielding his eyes from the morning sun. Bursting through the tree line at the edge of the county road, a quarter-mile down the driveway, was a towering wall of olive drab and desert tan. Leading the pack was an armored M1000 114 Humvee, its roof-mounted light bar, flashing amber. Right behind it was a monstrous M1070 heavy equipment transporter, an 8-wheel drive military semi-truck designed to carry 60-ton tanks. And behind that was another, and another, A full convoy of 6 massive military transport trucks, flanked by 4 more armored Humvees, turned off the highway and began barreling down Martha's driveway. "Sheriff!" Caldwell barked, panic briefly flashing across his face. "What is this? Did you call the National Guard?" I didn't call anybody," Robertson stammered, stepping back off the porch. The convoy didn't slow down. The lead Humvee swerved aggressively around Caldwell's parked Mercedes, kicking up a massive spray of gravel that peppered the luxury car's paint job. The massive M1070 transport trucks roared past, their sheer size dwarfing Caldwell's civilian bulldozers. The military vehicles formed a massive, impenetrable steel barricade directly between the bulldozers and the farmhouse. The engines cut off in unison, leaving a stunned, ringing silence in the humid air. The heavy armored doors of the lead Humvee swung open, stepping out into the Georgia dirt, wearing combat boots, standard-issue OCP camouflage, and a patrol cap pulled low over his eyes, was Captain David Higgins. He looked older, his face hardened by 14 months in a combat zone, a thick scar running along his jawline. But his eyes, Arthur's eyes, were blazing with an unyielding, terrifying fury. "David?" Martha gasped, dropping her suitcase. David didn't look at her yet. He marched straight toward Rick Caldwell, closing the distance with heavy, deliberate strides. Out of the other Humvees, a dozen heavily armed combat engineers from the 92nd Engineer Battalion poured out. They didn't draw weapons, but their sheer physical presence, clad in tactical gear and standing shoulder to shoulder in front of the farmhouse, was a devastating show of force. "Who is in charge of this civilian detail?" David's voice rang out like a gunshot. It was the voice of a man accustomed to giving orders in life-or-death situations. Caldwell, trying to regain his composure, puffed out his chest. "I am Rick Caldwell, CEO of Apex Logistics, and you are trespassing on an active, county-sanctioned demolition site. Soldier, I don't care what training exercise you think you're on. You need to turn these trucks around and get off my property before I call the Pentagon myself." David stopped 2 feet from Caldwell, towering over the billionaire. "This is not a training exercise," David said, his voice dropping to a deadly, quiet register. "My unit arrived back at Fort Stewart 36 hours ago. I am on approved emergency leave, and you are standing on my family's front lawn." Caldwell scoffed, though the nervous sweat beading on his forehead betrayed him. He gestured to Finch. "Show him the paperwork, Thomas. Tell this grunt how the real world works." Finch stepped forward, holding out the glossy folder. "Captain Higgins, I appreciate your service, but your mother is in default. The county has placed a lien on this property for environmental violations, and we have legally assumed the debt. We have a court-ordered eviction notice signed by a county judge." David didn't take the folder. Instead, he turned to the second Humvee and nodded. A woman in a crisp military uniform stepped out, carrying a thick leather briefcase. She wore the insignia of a major. "Mr. Caldwell, Mr. Finch," David said, crossing his arms. "I'd like you to meet Major Sarah Jenkins. She is a senior prosecutor for the United States Army Judge, Advocate, General's Corps." Major Jenkins adjusted her glasses and stepped forward, her demeanor entirely devoid of warmth. She pulled a single piece of paper from her briefcase and held it up. "Gentlemen," Major Jenkins began, her voice crisp and authoritative. "Are you familiar with the Service Members Civil Relief Act, Title 50 of the United States Code?" Finch's smug expression instantly vanished. The color drained completely from his face. The SCRA? "Exactly," Jenkins said. "The SCRA is a federal law designed to protect active-duty military personnel from facing financial ruin or property loss while deployed. Captain Higgins is a legally documented co-owner of this farm. His name has been on the deed since his father passed away 3 years ago." She took a step closer to the trembling civilian lawyer. "Under federal law, it is strictly illegal to enforce a lien, execute an eviction, or foreclose on a property owned by an active-duty service member deployed to a combat zone without a specific federal court order. County zoning boards and local judges have zero jurisdiction here." Caldwell turned furiously to his lawyer. "Thomas, what is she talking about? You told me this was airtight." I didn't know the son was on the deed," Finch stammered, backing away. "The public county records we pulled only showed the widow's name as the primary resident. Ignorance of federal law is not a defense. Mr. Finch. Major Jenkins continued relentlessly. By conspiring to place fraudulent environmental fines on this property, and by attempting to execute an illegal eviction against a deployed United States Army officer, you have committed multiple federal felonies. She turned her sharp gaze to Sheriff Robertson, who looked like he was about to faint. Sheriff, Jenkins said sharply, did you verify the legality of this eviction notice through federal channels before coming here to forcefully remove the mother of a deployed soldier? No, ma'am, Robertson squeaked, his hands shaking. Mr. Caldwell's office handled all the paperwork. I was just doing what the county judge told me to do. Well, Sheriff, David interjected, stepping forward, you are currently an accessory to federal extortion and illegal seizure. If you do not want the Department of Justice knocking on your precinct door by noon, I suggest you rethink your allegiances. Sheriff Robertson didn't hesitate for a microsecond. He turned to Caldwell, his hand dropping to his handcuffs. Rick, I'm sorry. I'm done. I am ordering you and your men off this property immediately. You work for me, Dale, Caldwell screamed, his composure totally shattering. His face was purple with rage. I bought your cruisers. I fund your campaigns. You can't do this. Actually, he can, Major Jenkins said smoothly. Because if he doesn't, I will personally see to it that the FBI opens a RICO investigation into the relationship between Apex Logistics and local law enforcement. In fact, based on the intimidation tactics, Mrs. and Higgins reported to the Red Cross slashed fences, poisoned animals, and arson. I'm already drafting the referral to the FBI field office in Atlanta. Caldwell looked at the massive military trucks blocking his bulldozers. He looked at the dozen combat-hardened soldiers glaring at him. He looked at his own lawyer, who was currently power-walking back to the Mercedes, desperately trying to distance himself from the situation. The billionaire realized with crushing certainty that his money and his local influence meant absolutely nothing against the wrath of the federal government and the United States military. He was entirely outmatched. This isn't over, Caldwell hissed, pointing a trembling finger at David. I will tie you up in court for the next decade. I will drain every cent you have. David leaned in close, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. You don't get it, Caldwell. We aren't fighting in your rigged local courts anymore. You touched my family. You threatened my mother. The United States Army provides me with free legal counsel, and Major Jenkins here has an entire department of federal prosecutors who would love to make a career out of dismantling your corrupt company piece by piece. Get off my farm. Caldwell stood frozen for a long second, his fists clenched in impotent rage. Finally, defeated and humiliated, he turned and stormed toward his Mercedes. He threw the car into reverse, nearly backing into a ditch before peeling out down the gravel driveway. The bulldozer operators, taking the hint, frantically climbed into their cabs and began reversing the heavy machinery off the property line, eager to escape the glare of the military engineers. As the sound of the civilian engines faded into the distance, the heavy tension in the air finally snapped. David turned around. The hard, imposing military commander melted away, replaced entirely by a son who had almost lost everything. He took off his patrol cap and dropped his tactical vest in the dirt. Martha ran down the porch steps, tears streaming down her face. David met her halfway, wrapping her in a fierce, desperate embrace. He buried his face in her shoulder, breathing in the scent of the farm, the scent of home. I'm sorry, Mom, David whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. I'm so sorry I wasn't here. I didn't know. You're here now, Martha sobbed, gripping his uniform as if she would never let go. You're here now, and that's all that matters. You saved us, David. You saved your father's farm. The soldiers of the 92nd Engineer Battalion stood at a respectful distance, giving the mother and son their moment. Major Jenkins smiled softly, closing her briefcase. The battle for the Higgins farm was over. Over the next 6 months, the legal fallout was absolute. Major Jenkins made good on her promise. The FBI raided the offices of Apex Logistics in Atlanta. Investigators uncovered a massive web of bribery and corruption, linking Rick Caldwell to local judges, county zoning officials, and the fire chief. Caldwell was indicted on multiple federal charges, including racketeering, extortion, and violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. His multi-million-dollar shipping port project was seized and permanently halted by federal regulators. Sheriff Dale Robertson quietly resigned before he could be formally charged, his reputation in the county completely destroyed. As for the Higgins farm, it flourished. With Caldwell's fraudulent liens erased and a hefty settlement paid out by Apex Logistics Insurance Company to avoid further federal lawsuits, Martha was able to buy 2 brand-new tractors and rebuild the equipment shed. David finished his military service a year later, trading in his combat boots for work boots. He moved back home permanently, taking over the day-to-day operations of the farm. Together, mother and son stood on their porch on a warm summer evening, looking out over 200 acres of thriving golden crops. The land was safe, the legacy was intact, and the greedy men who tried to steal it had learned a harsh, unforgettable lesson. Never underestimate a mother fighting for her home, and never, ever cross the United States Army. That's the incredible story of Martha and Captain David Higgins, a true testament to the fact that no amount of corporate greed can defeat a family's love and a soldier's determination. If you were inspired by David putting that corrupt billionaire in his place, please smash that like button. Share this video to support our troops and hardworking farmers. And don't forget to subscribe for more amazing real-life stories.